Great. So today we are coming to the close of our series, Winning, and we say that winning, don't let life stop you. And throughout the month, we have really taken a critical look at how we live our lives. And the question that we've been asking ourselves is, how do we live our lives without becoming the victims of the pressures of this life, without becoming victims of the way we have sort of designed our lifestyles? How can we win in life? How can we win in this year, even as we are coming to the close, almost close to the close of this year? And to answer this question, we have looked at various figures in the Bible. And one of them was actually God. We looked at how God did. In week 1, we learned the Genesis principle. You guys remember the Genesis principle? And we say that we need to begin by separating the chaos, which is our life, all the things that we're trying to do, all the things that we're involved in. Begin by separating and organizing that into priorities. You need to establish priorities in your life. What are the things that you do? What are all those things? Put them up in a list and set a priority for that. Then in the next week, we learned the boundary principle. And we said, now that you have listed down all your priorities, begin to put boundaries along those priorities, or around those priorities. If it is your work, if it is your family, your relationship, begin to put boundaries around those things that you consider your priorities. And then in the third week, we learned the unplug principle. And we said it doesn't end there. Because once you've established those boundaries, then you need to know when to unplug from one thing to the other. You need to know when to unplug from your work, because something has to stop. You don't unplug because work has ended. You unplug because it is time for you to stop and it's time for you to go home and probably now begin to plug in with your family. We continued last week. We learned the margin principle. And we say that we need to stop living as close to the edge as possible. Some of us are living risky lives where we have absolutely no margins when it comes to our finances, when it comes to our energy, even our relationships. We have absolutely no margin. And we say that we need to establish margins around our time, emotions, and even finances. Because to set ourselves up to win this year and even going forward, we need to apply these principles in our lives. And I'm glad, because these are principles that can be applied across the board. It doesn't matter whether you're a believer or not. These are principles that you can apply across the board, whether you have a relationship with Jesus Christ or not. But these are things that will set you up to win in life. Now, last week, I said that the most dangerous part of someone like this or a series like this is that the fact that a lot of us agree with what I say, with what we are learning here. But the danger is that when we get home, when we get back to our workplaces, nothing changes. And we continue as if everything is okay. Yes, you agree that there are some things that I need to change in my life. But you know very well that you're not going to change them, or you don't even apply them in your life. So what do we need to do to ensure that we are living healthy, balanced lives? And today I want us to learn from the story of a man who was a highly accomplished religious leader of his day. His exploits far outshone those of his peers. He was bold, and this guy was considered a trailblazer. And this saw him do things that few others would have imagined possible. In addition, he frequently addressed the political and military leaders of his day. It appears this guy's ministry was on the up. This guy was on a roll. The gentleman that I'm talking about is none other than Elijah. You've heard about Elijah. His story was told in the Bible. In the book of Kings, we have 1 Kings and 2 Kings. But you find in the book of 1 Kings, a lot of his story is mentioned there. And today I want us to narrow down on 1 Kings chapter 19. And allow me to give you an overview of 1 Kings 18, because you need to understand, before we get to chapter 19, I want us to understand what happened in chapter 18. So by the time we are coming to this, then you can be able to put it in context. Now, in chapter 18, Elijah performs one of the most daring miracles ever recorded in the Bible. And that's why you need to follow closely as I take us through this. You find that after 3 years of drought, he had prophesied. Elijah had prophesied. The land had shriveled up, and King Ahab, who was the leader of the nation at that particular point, had sent people all over the place to look for Elijah. And it was in vain. And one day, Elijah just shows up. He shows up, he meets this gentleman called Obadiah, and he sends him to the king and says, tell the king that I am here. Then, this is what happens in this day for Elijah. Okay, are we together? Are we together? So, Elijah comes to the king and he says to the king. Now the king at that particular point, the nation at that particular point, they were worshipping other idols, other gods. And these gods had false prophets. Now there was a god called Baal. And Baal had 450 false prophets. And then there was a god called Asherah. She had 400 prophets, false prophets. And Elijah comes to the king and he confronts the king and he says, I want us to go to Mount Carmel, and this is what you're going to do. Bring your false prophets, amounting to 850 if you put them together. Bring your false prophet, and then I will come. So it's 850 to 1. Your false prophet, all of us are going to offer a sacrifice to our gods. Whichever God answers by fire, then we shall know that is the real God. Talk about daring enough. So Elijah then calls for the test to prove who the real God was. So they are to sacrifice one bull each. The 450 of Baal went first. And for a full day, Elijah is sitting there waiting for their God to bring out fire and consume the sacrifice. So this is what he does, because he even starts taunting them and even mocking them. He's saying, perhaps your God is in deep thought. So you guys need to shout. You need to speak louder. You need to pray louder. Or maybe even he's relieving himself. We all know what that means. Or maybe your God has actually gone away on a trip. Have you even thought about that he could be asleep and he needs to be awakened? So Elijah is mocking them. So the prophets worked themselves into a frenzy. They even started cutting themselves and blood gushing out, because this was their norm. To no avail. And now it's Elijah's turn. So you remember, they've waited a whole day for their God to answer. But their gods haven't answered. Now it's Elijah's turn. And his day gets more hectic. The first thing that he does, he needs to repair the altar, because they always had to put the sacrifice on an altar. So he picks 12 large stones, and the 12 large stones represent the 12 different tribes of Israel. He picks 12 large stones, he puts them there, and then he collects wood, places it on the altar. Then he cuts the bull into pieces. Now, the Bible tells us that he cuts the bull into pieces. I can only imagine that probably someone there helped him, because I can't even imagine how you cut a bull on your own into pieces. So this is what he does. He cuts the bull into pieces, places it on the altar, and then he does something very interesting. He decides that, you know what, I'm not just going to show you that my God can actually answer by fire. I'm actually going to drown this sacrifice with water. Is that crazy? So he tells the guys who are there, take 4 big jars, large jars, fill them with water and come and pour it on the sacrifice. And they did do this 3 times. So those are 12 large jars of water. He even dug a trench around the altar, so that when the water pours on the sacrifice, it cannot go down, but it can be concentrated around the altar. Finally, he prays to God to burn the offering. And God dramatically does this. Eventually, all the people fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord is God." By anyone's standard, this day is a hectic day. We are told Mount Carmel is about 5.5 kilometers high. They walk up this mountain. This is where they're sacrificing. And the whole day they've been waiting for the other false prophets to call on their God. And then Elijah goes ahead and does this, offering this sacrifice, cutting up the bull, and then calling on God to bring down fire, which he does. By anyone's standard, that was a long, emotional, and physically draining day. Most people will be spent and need to call it a day. But not Elijah. He keeps pushing. The next thing he does is that he asks the people who are around there, the villagers, to take a hold of all the prophets and execute all of them, not leaving even one alive. Okay? Without even stopping for a break, he then climbs to the very top of Mount Carmel. Remember, I told you it's 5.5 kilometers high. He climbs to the very top of Mount Carmel, and this is what he does. He goes there to pray, because he had prophesied that there's not going to be any rain for 3 years, and now he's going there so that he can pray for rain, for God to bring back rain. He prays intensely, and for an extended time, God brings the breakthrough. The rain comes. And then something very interesting happens at the end of 1 Kings 18. Elijah tells his servant who he was with at that particular point, run to King Ahab and tell him, get onto your chariot and rush back to your court. Because if you don't rush back, then the rain is going to stop you. Because the rain that God is bringing about is going to stop you. But then God gives him special strength. And this is what happens. Elijah runs faster than the king's chariot. 1 Kings chapter 18. Go and read it. And he runs, we are told, from where he was, Mount Carmel, to Jezreel, where the king's court was, is 34 kilometers. This is 8 short of a full marathon. Are you picturing that? So we've come from a place where the guy was confronting the king. They've gone, they've burnt sacrifice, they've sacrificed to the Lord. He's gone back to pray to God. Then he's come and he has run faster, almost a full marathon, faster than a chariot. Okay, we are tracking together. All this in a day's work. Now let's pick it up from 1 Kings 19, from verse 1. Put that in mind. When Ahab got home, this is King Ahab, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods strike me and even kill me, if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you as you killed them. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. This is the same Elijah who has executed 850 false prophets. He has called on fire from heaven, and fire has come. I read this passage with some disbelief. I couldn't understand. You would expect that after such a day of seeing God's mighty work, he will be raring to face that wicked queen Jezebel. But when Jezebel swore she would have his head, what does Elijah do? He quit and ran away for his life, wanting even to die and praying that God would kill him. I'm almost like, dude, in case you've forgotten, you're Elijah. Just in case there was a recording, let's just play a replay and see how you've roasted about 850 prophets, false prophets. Why don't you just call on fire or hailstones to just sort out this lady? But he runs, scared. What we see here is a classic case of what we can call in our modern day terms, burnout. Here is someone who has pushed so hard. When you read the story of Elijah, he has pushed for so long that he was at the edge of his tipping point. His ministry may have been on the up, but what he didn't realize that he was just one threat away from fizzling out. As we have seen through the month, many of us are like Elijah. We are pushing our bodies to the absolute limit, moving at a hectic pace and living under constant stress. We may not initially see the problem, even though we are barely coping. Yet we do not realize is that we may very well be one phone call away from a total meltdown. We may be one personal situation away from our life coming to an abrupt end. We may see the signs of burnout, but for one reason or another, we ignore them. Psychology today defines burnout as a state of chronic stress, a condition that leads to 3 things. The first one, physical and emotional exhaustion. And this plays out as chronic fatigue, insomnia, those of us who are not able to sleep very long, physical symptoms you cannot shake off. Some of us have constant chest pains, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, or even just headaches. You have increased illness. Somehow you're always in hospital or just popping in drugs. The second thing that we see is a lack of enthusiasm, where you lose enjoyment in the things you do. You become pessimistic about life, and you isolate yourself. You separate yourself from others. And then a third indicator is a nagging sense of ineffectiveness, where you just feel there's a lack of accomplishment, where you feel hopeless about life. You feel useless about life. And this is what Elijah was feeling. You begin one project, then you're not able to finish it. You start another one, you're not able to. You enter into a relationship, you're not able to do it. Because there's a lack of accomplishment. There's a sense of ineffectiveness in your life. Many incomplete projects. Elijah was suffering from some of this. You see him giving up on life, wanting to die. Even though he's accomplished, he feels completely useless. But I'm glad because it doesn't end there. This is why I love reading God's word, because it doesn't leave us there. It doesn't leave us there. Whenever you encounter a situation and you go back into God's word, you discover that there's something that you can pick from God's word that will take you to where you need to be. God has an amazing response to Elijah, and I love it. He has an amazing response to Elijah, and I believe this is the same response that he has to some of us who might be suffering from stress or burnout. Today, I want us to learn our final principle, and this last principle, I call it the reset principle. Reset principle. It is almost as if God is telling Elijah, chill. It's time for you to reset. It's time for you to go back to your creator's settings. That's what, and we're going to see this. We are all familiar with the reset button in all our gadgets, right? When pushed, when that reset button is pushed, things are returned to normal, because after you've had your phone for a very long time, you fill it up with a lot of junk, apps and all these things, and it doesn't perform optimally. So you push the reset button so that it can go back to its original factory settings, enhancing their performance. So how do we reset? How do we go back to where God wants us to be, so that we can begin to be effective and operate at our optimal? The first thing, I find it in verse 5 and 9 in 1 Kings chapter 19. And it says this, then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. And the food gave him enough strength, watch this, to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There he came to a cave where he spent the night. Like many of us, let's pause there. Elijah was running out of fuel, and I find God's response to him very instructive. God doesn't rebuke Elijah for running away. You expect that he'll rebuke him. Instead, he sends an angel who allowed Elijah to do two very basic things. He allowed Elijah to rest and eat. Very basic. It's almost as if God is telling him, I need you to refuel. How basic is that? I just need you to refuel. I need you to rest and eat. Before even we have another conversation, just rest and eat. And the angels get him to have a meal and then let him sleep. You know, many of us we're very afraid that if we were to stop long enough or even take a vacation, something critical will fall down. Something somewhere will not work as it was supposed to. So we must always be on high alert. When we live like this, we are demonstrating to the world that we are the ones who are in control and not God. When I neglect to rest my body, I am acting as if the world depends on me and not God. When you neglect to just take that pause and rest, just to stop, rest and eat, I'm acting as if the world depends on me and not on God. Rest says to the world, there's only one God, and that God is not Kevin. When I rest, I'm at the place where I'm saying, God, you can handle this. You know, we find a very interesting command that we always quote all the time. Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 to 11. It commands us, observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. This is God speaking, and he's saying this, you have 6 days in which to do your work. But the seventh day is a day of rest dedicated to me. That's what God is saying. On that day, no one is to work, neither you, your children, your slaves, your animals, nor the foreigners who live in your country. In 6 days, I, the Lord, made the earth, the sky, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, I rested. That is why I, the Lord, made the Sabbath holy. Do you have a Sabbath? Do you have a dedicated time of rest? Do you have a time when you can just stop and say, this is my day, this is my time of rest? For those of us who have a job, remember that it was God who blessed you with that job in the first place when you prayed. So the job should not be taking you away from God, and you need to dedicate your time to be able to rest and just wait on God. And remember, even as you're resting, you'll be much more effective, or an effective employee, or even employer, when you rest. Sabbath is when you get to refuel your body and to re-energize it. Rest and eat. The first thing for you to reset is just to rest and eat, to refuel your body. The second thing, I find it in verse 9 to 13. But the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah says this, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you. They've torn down your altars and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." And God tells him, "Go out and stand before me on the mountain." And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God takes Elijah out onto a mountain and allows him to observe God's marvels. He sees a mighty windstorm. He sees the earthquake. He sees the fire. And then he hears a small, gentle voice. Guess where God's presence was? In the small, gentle voice. It's not in the middle of the spectacular moments that we hear God. It's when we stop, reflect, and listen. The second thing that we have to do to reset is to reflect. Elijah had just come from a spectacular, adrenaline-driven ministry experience or season. But I believe that God was teaching him this, that the still small voice is only for those who stop long enough to listen. The still small voice is only for those who stop long enough to listen. When was the last time you stopped long enough to listen to what God is saying about your job? When was the last time you stopped long enough to listen to what God is saying about your relationships? When was the last time you stopped long enough to hear and listen to what God is saying about your dreams, the ambitions that you have in life? If we are honest, many of us will admit that our lives move so fast. We are often having to try and listen for God's wisdom only when crisis hits. Martin Luther once said, "My day today is so busy that I need to spend at least 3 hours in prayer before I begin." Instead of prayer being the first thing that he threw out because of a busy day, he prioritized it in that busy day. And he said, "I cannot go without prayer. In fact, I need to spend 3 hours in prayer." We need to set aside time in each day to listen to God. I also mentioned here, I think about 2 weeks ago, where I said, we actually learned this from one of our spiritual leaders, the senior pastor of Nairobi Chapel, Pastor Oscar. And he taught us this, and we actually made it into policy, into the Mavuno staff team, how to have a spiritual personal retreat. Just a personal retreat where for 2 nights, you go away 3 times a year. Where you just take some time out to go and listen to what God is trying to tell you. Out of this hustle and bustle of the city, where you just go out to a solitary place where you're just quiet, you and your God. I remember the first time I did it as an intern, I thought to myself, 2 nights in a room with nothing, no one, no TV, no computer, nothing. How can I pray for 2 nights? It's almost impossible. But now I've gotten to the place where it has become a habit for all of us that you can almost sense that when you need time away. When was the last time you stopped to just say, "God, I am here. There's no distraction from my family. There's no distraction from my phone. I'm just here. Speak to me and tell me, what do you want me to do? What is my next step? What should I do?" When was the last time? And God is telling Elijah. It's almost as if he's telling him, stop and listen. Stop and listen. The second thing that we need to do to reset is to reflect. Stop, listen. Hear what God is trying to tell you. And set aside time to do that. Let's look at the final one. And I find this in verse 10 and 11. Elijah replied to God, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you. They've torn down your altars and killed everyone of your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Listen to what God tells him. Go out and stand before me on the mountain. Notice how after Elijah gave his long list of complaints, God doesn't even bother addressing those complaints. God knew that Elijah had lost focus on his assignment. Spending all his energy worrying about things that were not even his responsibility. The final thing that we need to do to reset is to refocus. You know, the issue of whether he was the only zealous and faithful prophet remaining in Israel was not his to consider. It wasn't his responsibility, it was God's. But he became so consumed with what he was doing that he lost focus. If you're not slowing down, then you could be running very fast, but doing things that God did not create you to do. It is like working very hard for you to finish and pass an exam and to answer the right questions, but you're answering the geography questions, and yet it's a maths exam. However right you answer those questions, you're not right, because you began with the wrong question in mind. God won't reward you in heaven for being so busy. He will reward you for doing what you are meant to be doing. Can I say that again? God will not reward you in heaven for being so busy. He will reward you for doing what you are meant to be doing. Not everything you're doing right now is your assignment. Newsflash. Instead of God responding to Elijah's complaint, God instead directed him to appoint kings for Syria and Israel. When you continue in chapter 19, when you see, I think from verse 13 to 18, you will see that God directs him, he instructs him to go and appoint kings for Syria and Israel, and also appoint a successor for himself. This was God's purpose for Elijah's life. And you need to understand your purpose in life for you to live life according to God's will. In the past, Elijah had accomplished great things by simply doing what God had asked him to do. Now he had lost focus on God and he was focusing on the ministry. He was becoming even more worried about the ministry than God was. How many of us have lost focus on what God called us initially? Or we don't even know what God has called us to do. And we are so busy, consumed in these things that we are doing, that we have forgotten that there's a purpose that God has for us. And maybe whenever we go to God, we are complaining. God, these people. And probably we are on the wrong track. When we listen to God, we actually end up doing less, not more. This is a fundamental truth. When we listen to God, we actually end up doing less, not more. But this less is more focused on what we are meant to be doing. Are we together? This less that you're going to be doing when you focus on God is more focused on what we are meant to be doing. You know, let me ask you a question. How heavy is this glass of water? All those who did physics in school. You want to discuss with your neighbor? How heavy is this glass of water? Okay, how heavy is it now? Anyone wants to take a wild guess? Anyone bold enough to take a wild guess? Okay, here's the thing. Someone took a wild guess somewhere? Yes. Just shout. Give that guy a bottle of water. Mavuno downtown, from my perspective, the absolute weight of this glass does not really matter. What matters is how long I hold it up. If I hold it up for about 2-3 minutes, nothing will happen. If I hold it up for about an hour or two, probably my hand will begin to cramp. If I hold it up for a day, I might even need support because I'll be suffering aches, my hand is going to become numb, and eventually what will happen, I'll drop it. Here's the thing. The stresses in life are very much like that glass of water. You go through them for a while, nothing changes. You go through them for a week or two, life can continue as usual. But you continue the same in a week, a month, a year. If nothing changes in your life, you'll get to a place where your life will become paralyzed and you will not be able to do anything, let alone do what God has called you to do. God is calling us to reset. Go back to the Creator's settings. Figure out what is it that God is calling us to do so that you can focus on that and stop busying ourselves with the things that we are doing in our lives. To win in life, we need to hit that reset button. As we come to the close of this series, many things have been shared. Many principles have been shared in this place. It's up to you to do what you need to do, to apply it in your life. The first thing you need to do is to refuel. What if you just decided to rest and eat? Just take downtime and rest. Then reflect. Just stop. Stop everything that you're doing and just listen to God. Try and listen to what God is trying to tell you. Some of us, we don't even know how to listen. In fact, the question that we're asking right now is, how do I listen to God? Because we don't know. But you need to start somewhere. But then we need to focus ourselves and do what God has called us to do. Over the past few weeks, I've been giving us some homework to go and do. I've been giving us some challenges. And this week we decided, you know what, we're not going to give you 3 or 4 or 5 things. I just want to give you one thing that you can do. What if every one of us here, before sunrise, decided that I'm going to take at least 15 minutes in God's presence? That I'm going to sit somewhere and just ask God, order my day. Show me what you want me to do. Show me what you want me to do with my life. Direct my life. I have talents, I have gifts. Show me how I can use it to bring glory to your name. What if we just decided that each and every one of us, that before 6 in the morning, even if you have to wake up at 5:45, and you just ask God, show me what you want me to do this day, so that we can become effective and live life according to His will.